Hello and welcome, my name is Hiro, and this is a guide on land combat in Europa Universalis 4. Now I'll feature different videos for naval combat, for sieges, and for more general military tactics. So this video will only focus on the actual combat and what determines it. And understanding combat is very important in this game and can really determine difference between success in the game and defeat. It is, however, quite complicated, so it taken me a long time to get a good view of this, and hopefully I can be able to explain this in a way so that you will understand most of it, or be able to use most of it. But I also suggest you go to the Wikipedia and look at the different things yourself, and also just to go into some games and kind of try it out. It took me a lot of time to get all the things right, but it's very important. But let's just get down to it. The most basic thing to understand about combat is that it will go on until one side either runs dry on troops or runs dry on morale. And as you can see, in the current situation, I have a lot more morale than my enemy does, so I have a much bigger chance of winning this combat. Once you run short of troops, it's quite self-explanatory. Of course, your army will have been destroyed. But if you run dry on morale, it means that you will flee the combat, and fleeing means that you will have an improved speed and you can get away, but also means that you'll be on very low morale, and whenever you get into a combat with no morale, you'll just be destroyed outright. And generally getting into combats with low morale is a very dangerous thing. So morale is very important in combat. But there's a lot of other factors, so let's start have a look at them. In the military screen, you can get an overview of most of the factors that determines combat. Up here you can see all the factors that affect your military units. And down here you can see the more general factors that affect your combat's general ability in combat. Up here you can see your army tradition. Your army tradition is gained through ideas with buildings, and it's gained whenever you are doing land combat or sieging. And it decreases by a determined value each month. So army tradition is usually built through wars and then decays through peace. But army tradition affects the morale of your armies. It affects how quickly you recover your manpower, and I'll get into more details about manpower in another video. And it also affects your army's abilities to recover morale. So army tradition can be very important, and you also always try to try to keep it at the maximum in order to win, have an advantage in war. Morale. Your country's general morale score can be seen here, and it's affected from technology. It's affected by ideas. As you can see, I have the military drill idea, which affected. It's also affected by army tradition. It's affected by your maintenance. It's affected by war exhaustion, and it's affected by prestige. So there's a lot of things you can do to improve land morale and kind of give you an big advantage in combat. The last one here is force limit, and I'll come into that more later, but that basically determines how much army you can support. Down here are two of the other big modifiers that come into play. First off, here is your military tactics. Military tactics is kind of your defensive modifier, and it reduces the damage you take in combat. Military tactics is gained through technology, and is also affected by discipline. Discipline affects the amount of damage you do in combat, but also applies to your military tactics. So right now I have 120% discipline, and that is applied to my military tactics. So whenever I'm in combat, my actual military tactics will be 2.4 and not 2, because it's modified by my discipline. So having a higher discipline is also very important to combat, since it both affects your damage and your tactics. Now, discipline can be affected by ideas and by military advisors. So I don't have one available right now, but you can get a commander which gives 5% extra discipline. So he can be really nice if you're going into to war, because it will give you the ability to do more damage and to defend against damage more easily. But what actually decides damage is your individual troops. And as you can see here, there's a lot of things affecting the troops, and when you go into to look at the individual troops, there's even more things affecting them. And I'll try to go through them all as good as I can. Right now, as you can see, I'm using the charged infantry, which becomes available at level 16. If I just click off this box, you can see all the outdated military types that would be available earlier in the game. But most of the time you'll just be wanting to see your current and what you can kind of hope to achieve at some point. This row explains at which military technology level you'll have the troops available. The troops have 3 modifiers that apply to them. There's the fire modifier, the shock modifier, and the morale. The fire and the shock modifiers are damage modifiers that determine the damage your troops will do in combat, while your morale is a modifier for the morale of your individual troops in the combat. So this will affect how much morale you'll have in the combat. As you can see here, if I mouse over a unit, they have an individual morale that is determined by their overall morale and their individual morale. So as you can see, there's 2 scores for each type of unit, and that's because they have different modifiers depending on if they are attacking or defending. And as you can see down here, right now I'm playing as Austria and I'm attacking Bohemia. So I'll be using my offensive scores while he'll be using his defensive scores. Right now at level 16 military technologies, there's only 1 unit to choose from, but as you can see here at level 19 I'll have several different units to choose from, and this applies to most technology levels. You'll often have different types of infantry to choose from, and these will be specializing either in offensive or defensive modifiers, and usually there will also be difference whether they are focusing on damage or morale. So keep this in mind when you choose which kind of unit you'll use. You have to tailor it both to your own your own play style. So if you tend to attack more, you'll want to use troops that have better attack scores, and if you tend to defend more, you'll use the bottom scores. And also you can kind of see that if you are a big country getting into a lot of wars for domination, you will probably want attack scores because you're not kind of need to destroy your opponent's armies. But if you are a smaller country that are defending a lot of attacks, then you'll want to have defending points. But these are not the only things that determine damage. This is just the base scores. Furthermore, they are modified by your weapon modifiers, and these are the weapon modifiers. They can be changed through technology and apply as a modifier to your damage. So for example, I have a infantry shock modifier of 1.25, which means that once my damage is calculated, it is modified by 1.25. So if I was to do 1 damage, I would actually be doing 1.25 damage because of my shock modifier. And the same apply in the fire phase. I mean, if I'm in the fire phase, I use my fire modifier or fire weapon modifier here to determine my damage. And furthermore, the damage will also be multiplied by my combat ability. Now, in most cases, you will have a combat ability of 0%, which which will mean that you won't affect it won't affect your damage. But you can improve this through ideas. For example, you can see how there in the quality ideas, there's ideas that improve your infantry combat ability, your cavalry combat ability, and your artillery combat ability. And this translates into direct damage. So a 10% improved combat ability means that you do 10% extra damage. So that can be really powerful. So that's all the modifiers that affect damage. Then we also have to look at our leaders, because they also affect the combat. Leaders have 4 different stats. They have the fire stat that affect the amount of damage you'll do in the fire phase of combat. They have a shock stat that will affect the amount of damage you'll do in the shock phase of combat. And they have a maneuver score. This maneuver score determines how quickly your armies will move around the map. You can hire your leaders down with this interface. You can either pay at military points to get them, or you can convert your ruler or your heir to a leader. And you can only do this if your leader, if your ruler is over 15 years of age, and only if he's a man. And usually, if you buy a general, his ability will be determined by your army tradition, whereas if you convert your ruler, his abilities will be determined by his military skill. I think that's the overview of the different units. Now look at the combat. There are 3 different factors that affect how you can do damage in combat. First up is the combat width. This is very important both in combat, but also when you try to decide how you'll kind of put together your armies. Combat width is decided by your technology level. So, for example, if you look here, right now I have a technology in Austria that gives me plus 15 combat width. The base is 15, so the current, my normal combat width would be 30. So I could use 30 units at the same time. But because we are currently fighting in hills, there's a 33% modifier to the combat width, which takes the effective combat width down to 20. The thing, kind of terrain that affects this are forests, hills and mountains, and they affect differently. So I think forests is about 33%, or 15% or something like that, and hills are 33%, while mountains are 66%. So the better, the higher the modifier, the better, the more defensive you will be able to be in the land, because only units in the front row are able to do damage. So that's kind of important. What terrain you are actually fighting in is randomly determined by the types of terrain that are currently in the province you're fighting in. So, for example, if you go to the terrain map mode and mouse over this, I don't know how this is pronounced, Cephas or something like that, you can see that 35.8% is plains, 22.2% is woods, and so on. And this is the actual chance you'll have to fight in that particular terrain. So choose your terrain carefully when you are trying to defend, and be beware of what terrains you are attacking into when you are on the offensive. This can really determine a lot who wins. One more thing to know about combat width is that you will always use the highest combat width available. So if you have a technological advantage over your enemy, you won't actually have a higher combat width than him. The combat width for the whole combat will always be the maximum amount. So down here you can see currently in this combat I have a lot more units than my opponent. This means that I'll try to fill up this front row in each combat phase, which means I'll be able to do much more damage than he can, because I have more units in the front row. So you'll kind of want to tailor your armies so that you can fill up as much of your own combat with as possible to try and maximize the damage that they can do in any given combat. Now the other things that determines which units you can do damage with is the maneuver score, and that's the biggest difference between cavalry and infantry. Cavalry have a maneuver score of 1, while cavalry and artillery have maneuver scores of 2, and these are then modified by your technology maneuver score. So I have plus 25%. So I'll actually have a higher maneuver score. I think the maneuver score is always rounded down, so it hasn't affected me yet. But when my units get damaged, when they get below 75% combat strength, they will lose 25% of their maneuver score. So that means that my units will fight at this maneuver score even when they get down to a smaller regiment size. But that's one of the more advanced things. But anyway, when you mouse over, you'll have a more precise view of the actual units they can attack, as you can see down in the bottom. This regiment can only attack 1 cavalry regiment. This can attack 2, this can attack 2, this can attack 3. And down here you can see that all my different units are able to attack more. Now, the way you set up your armies, you don't have any influence over this yourself, but the computer will always try to fill the middle with infantry and then have cavalry out on the sides. And this means that your infantry will almost always get into combat, and your cavalry will be on the sides because they have more maneuver, so they can flank. So you can see this cavalry unit can do damage to 2 units down here, but his units, because they are further into the middle, they can actually do damage to 5 units. So sometimes having the smaller army means that each of your units are more effective, while of course having the bigger army means that you can do more damage all in all. But if you look at this outwardmost regiment, this cavalry unit can't actually participate in the combat because it doesn't have maneuver score enough to reach any of his regiments. Now artillery is a bit different story. Artillery can actually attack from the back row, which means that artillery can greatly improve the effectiveness of your armies. When the units are set up, the computer will always try to put your artillery in the back if at all possible. Because whenever your artillery gets placed in the front line, it will take 50% extra damage from the direct combat compared to your other troop types. So you'll always try to tailor your units so that you can fill up the front line and keep your artillery in the back, just to protect your artillery. Also, that will greatly increase the effectiveness of your army, since you can attack with your infantry and your artillery at the same time in this way. So this was all the basics of who actually gets to attack. And just to sum up, the combat width is determined by the highest technology and by the terrain. And this determines how many units can attack at the same time. Each individual unit can attack a number of units determined by their position on the battlefield as well as their maneuver score. Cavalry will oftentimes be able to attack more units than infantry will. Now let's look at how the actual damage is calculated. So every combat is made up of 2 different types of phases. There's the fire phase and the shock phase. And in each of those phases you'll use the modifiers that corresponds to that phase. So now we are in the fire phase, and every time damage is calculated, we'll use my regiment's offensive fire damage and his regiment's defensive fire damage, as well as my leader's fire damage and his leader's fire damage. So you can see in this particular instance, I have a fire score of 4. He also has a fire score of 4. Some our leaders are offset. But let's get into that that calculation. The calculation is done in 3 steps. First, the leader modifier is calculated, and that's affected by 3 things. First off, there's a random dice roll. The dice roll can be from 0 to 9, and it's totally random and not affected by anything. Then there's the leader score. As I explained, I had 4, he has 4, so they are subtracted from each other, and whoever has the highest will get the difference added to his score. And furthermore, I get a -2 penalty for fighting in hills, and a -1 penalty for crossing rivers, and this only applies to my damage score. So right now I have a leader damage score of 3, while he has a leader damage score of 9. Now this value is calculated and then carries over to the next phase, which is the individual damage. This individual damage is determined for each unit and applied to the units that's in their maneuver range, and is determined as follows. First, you take the individual troops of damage value and subtract the defense value for whoever they are attacking, as well as 50% of the defense value for any defending artillery. So again, the artillery helps both in attacking and defending. This attack value is then added to the leader modifier, and that is the damage. That damage is then in the next step modified by the weapon modifier. The weapon modifier was this score. It's then modified by the combat ability, which is this score. It's then modified by the discipline, which is this score. And then finally it's modified by the military tactics, which is this score. And they all work like actual modifiers. So for example, I have a fire score of 1. So if we look at this unit, I have a fire score of 4. He has a fire score of 4. So I do 0 damage. Then my leader damage is added. That was 3. So I do 3 damage. That 3 damage is then modified by my fire damage, which is 1. So it's still 3 damage. It's modified by my combat ability. So it's still 3 damage. It's then modified by my discipline. It gets an extra 20% added, so it's now 3.6 damage. And then it's then finally modified by his military tactics. So it's modified by 2. So it will be halved to 1.8 damage. That damage is then applied to each of the regiments I'm affecting, both to their actual numbers and then also as morale damage. And I'm not, I haven't been able to find any calculations on how the actual morale damage work or how the actual numbers work, but hopefully that will be available in the future. And do check out the Wikipedia, as at the time you watch this video someone might have actually written something about it. But that was how the actual damage is modified. Then in addition to all the units in front, all your artillery units can affect, as you can see, a lot of units, and they fire from the back. But as I already explained, when they fight from the back, only 50% of their damage is dealt. So, just to sum up, your damage in the combat is affected by your individual troops scores for the particular phase. It's affected by your leader modifier. It's affected by your weapons modifier. It's affected by your combat ability, and that number is then affected by your discipline and by your opponent's military tactics. So that's all the things that go into determining this. So as you can probably gather from this, it's a big advantage to have superior technology, because you will have superior weapon modifiers, you'll have superior troop types, you'll have greater maneuver score, you'll have greater military tactics, and if you are able to get some ideas, you can also improve your discipline. And furthermore, having a higher technology can improve your morale, which can mean that you can stay in the fight for longer. So I think that sums up the whole combat phase. So let's look at a few rounds of examples. So here we had one tick. I did some actual damage to him, and some damage. I got some damage applied from this roll in the fire phase, and then we move on to the next fire. Once again, I rolled a 6, he rolled a 9. The damage get applied and applied to his morale, and we move on to the next roll. Now we have moved over to the shock phase, and now it's my shock values that are used. And once again, new rolls are constantly made. Now he has an extra modifier because he has a better shock value than mine. This damage will be calculated for each tick of the combat. As I said, there is 5 combat phases in each fire phase and 5 combat phases in each shock phase. If you just let this run, at the end I ended up winning this combat by killing his morale. During the combat I lost 3,000 infantry, 69 cavalry and 44 artillery, while he lost 766 infantry, 1,377 cavalry and 450 artillery. I hope this gave you a bit of insight into how the combat in Europa Universalis 4 works. It's quite complicated, so I can definitely I would definitely suggest that you go read the Wikipedia page. I will link to it in the comment to the video. But I hope that this has given you a better understanding of how combat works. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.